Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited about our program today. I'm so grateful to our panelists for joining us and being, so generous with their time and with their expertise and with their memories. As you all know, I hope this program is in support of our current exhibition in our Rankin West Gallery, an exhibition of the work of just some of the artists who have lived and made on Artists Alley. This has been, I think, a really important show for BRAHM to put together and a long time coming. Artists Alley is, as Stephen said, our homegrown artist colony. Was convenient for me when I arrived at BRAHM because part of my research as an art historian has been focused on artist colonies, how they form, what they mean, what it does for artists and for the communities around them. And I was shocked to discover that there was one right here in Blowing Rock. And it has been such a pleasure getting to know that story even better, a very valuable lesson for me, and we're just so pleased to be able to hear a little bit more today. So this is going to be a pretty straightforward roundtable. I'm going to start us off with just a couple questions, but really, I think the reason we're all here is to listen to this group talk with each other, to hear what they have to say, and hopefully some exciting and unexpected insights emerge from the conversation they're going to have. So I'm going to read off everybody's bio to get you a little bit more familiar with them, and then we're going to get started. So, Herb Cohen has connections to Blowing Rock reaching back to 1958, when he began spending time on the mountain with friend and fellow artist Philip Moose. Cohen would go on to build a home and studio on Artists Alley with his husband, fiber artist and painter José Fumero, where they would live and work until 2011. Earning a BFA and MFA from New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University, Herb has served as an instructor at Alfred University, a designer for Hyalyn Porcelain Company in Hickory, North Carolina, and as exhibits director and acting director at the Met Museum of Art in Charlotte. As an award-winning potter and sculptor, he has exhibited throughout the United States, served as juror for numerous exhibitions, fairs, and shows, and served appointments to regional committees and boards. Herb is also a founder emeritus of the Blowing Rock Art and History Museum. Lynn Jenkins is a potter living and working in Valley Cruces, North Carolina. Lynn moved with her family into the Artists Alley community of Blowing Rock in 1971. Her journey with the ceramic medium began there and would continue through classes at Watauga High School before completing Haywood Community College's professional crafts program in clay in 1980. She would go on to build her home and studio on Artists Alley, where she would live and work for the next 25 years. Her raku pottery has been exhibited widely, including with the Southern Highland Craft Guild, where she served as president of the board. Sue Glenn is a founding member of BRAHM's Board of Trustees and a longtime friend and supporter of the residents of Artists Alley. She brings a unique perspective on the impact of Artists Alley and on the larger community of Blowing Rock. And last but not least, we have Lee Rocamora, who is also a member of BRAHM's Board of Trustees and an avid collector and student of modern and contemporary craft. As a friend and collector of many members of Artists Alley, he holds a nuanced perspective on their broader context. And Sue, because you're next to me, that means you'll go first. Tragic that you chose the chair right by me. So I'm gonna start out with an easy one, hopefully. So this is a question for everybody. I invited each of you here to speak together today because you represent different stakeholders in the larger Artists Alley community. Artists and residents of the enclave from different generations, close friends and supporters of Artists Alley, and also collectors and connoisseurs of the art made there. I wonder if we can begin this discussion by each of you describing briefly what Artists Alley means to you personally, the experience of it, its legacy, or otherwise. What is the most essential part of that story to you?
Just quickly, I started going to Artists Alley because a neighbor encouraged me to go out and see what was there. They were having annual shows on Labor Day weekend. And so what they would do then was they would open up their homes and studios. In some cases they'd invite other friends, but what they would do then was show off what they'd been up to for a year. And it was just this amazing acquaintance with these remarkable, interesting, talented people. And it was a quick insight into a different kind of lifestyle entirely, where people were just boldly making things and offering them and expressing themselves. And the people that were there on Artists Alley were just so incredibly talented that it was just an absolute joy to get acquainted with them. But that began like in 1978, and the more I got acquainted with them, the more interesting they were, and it was just more exciting to be more connected with them. And so when you come to my house, it's completely littered with artist alleys.
It is.
And so, you know, and I'm thrilled with every bit of it.
On to her.
Well, my first introduction to Blowing Rock and to the area of Artist Alley, which was not Artist Alley at the time, was my friendship with Philip Moose, who was teaching at Queens College at the time, and I was living in Charlotte after working at Hyalyn Porcelain for a number of years. Had moved to Charlotte to be with Jose and start a business there and work at the Mint Museum. And through Philip, we were invited to Blowing Rock and became acquainted with the area and the people here, and started to love the mountains of North Carolina. And we've been both working in industry for a number of years, and been away from what we really wanted to do was our own work, and decided eventually to quit our salaried positions and take advantage of the offer of a nice piece of property that Philip Moose was able to sell to us, and we decided to just quit everything and move up to Blowing Rock and start working and doing our own work, and owning our own equipment. We had a good start, and owning our own house in Charlotte, we had a good start with being able to sell that and build our place here in Blowing Rock. And starting with perhaps about $100 in the bank, we were able to develop our business and grow and make contacts with sales organizations, and as members of the Southern Highland Guild and the Piedmont Craftsmen and the Carolina Designer Craftsmen at the time, which no longer exists. We were able to find outlets for our work and keep going, and that was a good start for our business, which lasted for 38 years up here until we moved back to Charlotte again after many decisions that had to be taken into consideration. And well, that's an overview of my part.
Well, my part of Artist Alley to me is it's home. So when my family moved into John Brady's house, I think it was 1971, and so that was the first house on the corner when you moved in, when you start on the alley. And at the time, I picked up rocks out of Artist Alley and painted them, and I thought I was pretty crafty. Well, then these guys lived down the street, and I was pretty curious. So my mom said, well, don't stay long. I'd go down and watch Herb make pots. I didn't know then that I wanted to be a potter, but then I got to high school and fell in love with it. And then from there on, Herb has been my mentor. And, so Artist Alley is home, it's family, and it's community. And I think all those things make up who we are. and I guess we'll get into it a little deeper later, but, yeah, to have these guys to look at and know where I was headed. You know, I wanted to be a potter, but how was I gonna make that my reality every day? I was 19 years old, and I didn't want a real job. I didn't really want to be in the real world. Well, hey, they were doing pretty good. And I didn't really know that they came from professional lives to here. I didn't know they were escaping the real world. So I just thought, well, okay, they're doing it, I can do it. So at 19 years old, I went out and borrowed $39,000, and my parents had given me the property behind the house that we lived. And the rest was history. But I did run out of money when I built that. So that was in 1980, and the interest on construction loans was 18%. So time was ticking and money was going down the drain. You know, every day you couldn't get it done. So I had this great studio, but I didn't have a kiln. I ran out of money. So how many neighbors would have offered that I could fire my pots at his studio? So I took my pots in my Volkswagen van, and our driveways were pretty steep. Mine was much steeper than theirs. Board by board up there. You remember this, Herb?
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, we had to have a schedule, who was gonna use the kiln, you know? And then I went to my grandmother and asked for another loan. I mean, I had to prove that I could make some money. I'd already taken out this other loan, and I was doing craft shows. At that time, I didn't have any retail outlets, but at first year, I did 16 shows. And then the other part is, not only could you borrow a kiln, but we didn't borrow like sugar or flour and stuff like that. We borrowed chemicals to make glazes with, you know? And yeah, many nights I was invited up there to eat dinner, and when I was having a few too many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I'd get real food up there. They taught me to cook too. Flan, paella. Yeah, if any of you had ever been to Herb and Jose's for dinner, it was a wonderful time around that table, many, many hours. As Lee could tell you.
Many good meals, many things shared. Well, my first entry to Artist Alley was their annual sale with Labor Day. I did actually not know any of the people at Artist Alley, but I had a good friend from Winston-Salem who was a jeweler, who, as Sue mentioned, they also invited outsiders. And this good friend would come stay with me, and through her, I met Herb and Jose, and ultimately Lynn and Philip, and I think there are a few other people as well. So, you know, it became a family. You know, it was a family weekend. And then as I spent more time up here, I realized that, hey, these people exist other than Labor Day weekend. And you go rumbling out there, or they come in, and many great meals, many great stories. It's a great education, you know. These are real people. They're not objects that don't get touched, or people that you can't approach. Artists are approachable, and they love that. And that's one thing that was truly remarkable about this community. Not only were they great among a community of themselves, but they welcomed everybody.
I just have a real quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know anything about Artist Alley, so where was it, when was it, does it still exist? So just a little synopsis.
You know who I think would be best equipped to give that synopsis? One Sue Glenn.
They're just doing this because I'm in the real estate business. But also, Artist Alley is out Highway 221, about 3.5 miles from Main Street. Okay, so if you go out to the second stoplight here, turn left and go out past West Glow. Right now, there's some big condominiums being built right across the street. But just briefly, some of the people that aren't here are represented in Artist Alley. So the property was originally part of just an old wagon road that went out in that direction. This supposedly blazed by Daniel Boone. It was the old Yanalasi Trail, yeah, and but it didn't have an actual name. It's just a little one-lane road. But how it got established had another person involved. There was a lady named Minerva Goldsmith that used to be a hairdresser at the Mayview Manor Hotel here in town in Blowing Rock. And we're told that she used to, as she was doing people's hair, she would look across the gorge and there was this beautiful meadow across the way. And she coveted that piece of property. And then when she married, she was living part of the year in Blowing Rock, part of the year in Florida, in Palm Beach. And she got acquainted with a haberdasher there named Leon Goldsmith. And Leon fell in love with Miss Minerva. And so when they got married, he started acquiring the land out there, that beautiful meadow, for her. And they ended up with about 100 acres there. And Minerva was quite entrepreneurial, so she began a real estate development there called Rocky Meadows, and then she was learning how to be a subdivider and developer. And she was also an artist herself. She liked paint, she did some wonderful sculpture, and we don't have there are only a few examples that we could find about that. But she had heard about a good teacher from the Piedmont area named John Brady. And so she lured John Brady to come up, and she sold him a lot and got him to build a studio and a teaching facility right next to her. And so she could learn from him. Well, John Brady knew other Piedmont artists, so he knew Philip Moose. And he would lure Philip Moose up to come help him sell things and have a painting weekend and that sort of thing. So Minerva began selling lots initially to, I think Philip Moose bought his lot in 1959. I think John Brady had bought his lot and built his house in 1958. And they were beginning to, and then later Philip bought additional lots, two of which he sold to Herb and Jose. But that's what got it started, was these other people. So gradually, the original artist moved away. Barbara Ballasty is still there. She came in late, and she's potting now, and some of her pieces are down there. But the map, just the little map, is up here for you to see. And you can go in and just drive the loop, and the houses are still there. Philip Moose's house has been substantially transformed, but Studios 2 is there, Lynn's house is there. The house right on the corner is John Brady's old house, and it was the Jenkins family home. And then next to Philip Moose's house was where Frank Sherrill's house was, and you'll see his work downstairs also. So some of the artists aren't here now, but Barbara's a survivor now. So.
I think, on that note, what Sue was talking about, with the origin of Artist Alley, the emergence, I think, there's an interesting story of the development of the land and the artists arriving, and this sort of process of one artist luring another, and then those artists luring another artist. So I'm kind of curious, I think I'll start with you, Herb, and then maybe Lynn, you can talk about it as the years go on. But, you talked about you and Jose wanting to focus more explicitly, more directly on your own studio practice, that you had been working in the industrial arts, designing work for others, for companies, for commercial production. So that's a clear sort of motivation for this major transition you and Jose made, giving up your lives in Charlotte and moving up the mountain. But I wonder if you could talk more about the sort of ethos, the energy around Artist Alley's formation, particularly because I know it didn't come together overnight. It was many years of artists slowly arriving and building a relationship with the land in these mountains. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, that experience and the sort of motivations that everyone was feeling.
Well, we didn't purposely try to start a neighborhood of artists. It just happened naturally. Actually, Minerva was the first person in that area. She was a painter, and she and John Brady used to, I believe, show in Blowing Rock. They had a show in Blowing Rock and invited Philip also to show in that show, a public showing of their work for a couple of years. I'm not sure how long that lasted, but anyway, our first visit to Blowing Rock was while Philip was living in a basement, one-room apartment that was in a Minerva's Goldsmith's studio with an outhouse. And when he purchased property from Minerva and started building his house, here Jose and I were building our house in Charlotte at the same time. And we'd come up and compare notes and spend time with Philip, and actually we laid down his first carpeting that he had. Jose was the designer for Collins and Aikman and in Albemarle, and designed all the automotive and airline fabrics that at one time 70% of the automotive and airline fabrics of the world is what Jose designed. So he had a very prominent position, but was also a painter and a weaver. And we added on to our house in Charlotte a studio, which we rarely were able to get into because of the work that we were involved in with our own professional work. He with Collins and Aikman, and me with the Mint Museum. And that was one of the reasons we, after a while, we decided we had a studio that wasn't being used, and we didn't think that we could continue even to get away from all the different events happening in Charlotte and concentrate on our own work unless we were someplace else. And that was one of the reasons that we decided to move to the mountains. I don't know what to add to right now.
You know, while your studios were here, clearly you had travel off the mountains and had lots of other encounters in different countries, different artists. How did you bring those back, and how do they impact your work here?
Well, of course, being artists, our eyes were open and minds open to any creative work that we'd see any place. And we were fortunate enough to be able to arrange to travel to Europe a number of times, and to the Far East a couple of times. And I, of course, had spent my Army years in Korea, and was able to visit Japan too while I was there. So all these different influences and ideas that collected and Jose collected were able to affect our decisions about how to work and how to use subject matters and develop a style which changed from time to time.
Herb, I know that, you know, we've talked in the last months as I've been visiting you about how many artists you also brought to Artist Alley, and to my mind that's also a pretty clear reflection of your travels and your sort of wider global community, which I think is such a fascinating idea, that we would have artists from, you know, around the world but also around the country coming to stay in Blowing Rock of all places. I think, you know, we think of Artist Alley as this little road, this little alley off, you know, the side of a mountain with just a handful of artists living on it. But there was also this transient community to some degree that was so much larger, that would come in and come out, and sometimes come, you know, over the course of a number of years more than once. And I think that lends a real interesting depth to the work y'all were doing there, that it was so hyper-localized but also so broad at the same time.
Well, being involved with different arts organizations in Charlotte, and just like Lynn, we had friends from different parts of the country and a good part of the South. I did a good deal of jurying different shows because when my position at the Met Museum would afford me the opportunity to be invited to come to different competition shows around the country and jury them and meet different people, and of course made lots of friends in different parts of the country. And anytime they were in this area of United States, they would be urged by me to stop in and pay a visit. So all kinds of ideas came from so many different people and places, I'm sure, as well as they did with Lynn and the people that you meet who are visiting the guild where you demonstrate or a good deal of the time every year. I don't know if you have something that you'd like to.
Not only did he invite them to come by, but a lot of times they hosted them. If they were doing a show, please stay with us. Eat our food. They took care of a lot of artists that came into the community. So I learned to do that too. So, you know, you'd hear a lot of traffic even on Art in the Park days when none of us were doing Art in the Park, but we were having artists stay with us. They were doing Art in the Park. We would have, you know, I learned to be a part of different guilds and that they were available to us, and how are we going to work, keep these guilds going, and so that there would always be education for the next generation. And so, you know, Herb and Jose both taught me a lot about that. And so there were a lot of meetings on Artist Alley. I think that were a big part of the art community and craft community here, and encouraging a lot of people to pursue that as their career. It could be your career. And, you know, Philip doing the same thing, encouraging people to paint. And,
There were a number of other artists who are no longer living there. The house next to you,
Frank?
well, Frank Sherrill, of course, but the house between Frank's and yours She was a painter.
Marie.
Marie.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one, of course, next to Philip. The house that was built next to Philip was built by Walter Thrift, who was a painter from Virginia Beach, whom I became acquainted with because he would send work to the Mint Museum, to our competition shows, and I introduced him to Philip and the mountains here, and he and his partner decided to quit their space in Virginia Beach and move to Blowing Rock and built the house next to Philip Moose. And unfortunately, the morning after they moved in, Walter Thrift died. And so they never lived here. And that house is now owned by the Boyers, whose parents were good friends of Philip Moose through their parents, who were Dr. and Mrs. Lazarin, who built the 7 stories on, what's the name of the road?
Wonderland Trail.
Yeah. And Dr. Lazarin was a good friend of Philip's and his wife, who was a former Rothschild, had their summer home here, and they took Philip to Europe with them on a trip, so that Philip could work with Dr. Lazarin, who wanted to paint and draw, and it was a kind of a working vacation for them both. Just a little aside for that. While we had our Artist Alley open house every year, we had space in my house to invite other artists to come and show with us. We had Shirley Gall, who was a jeweler, and we had 2 different glass blowers at different times. Jack Brewer, and I can't
Mark,
remember.
did you have,
Glenn
yeah,
Randall.
Randall.
I can't remember his.
They were young from
They were
Charlotte.
young,
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And
Laura Sims.
Laura Sims. So we had a house full of artists and showing their work and demonstrating also. And
Roger Jacobs was there.
yeah, right. So it was really quite a very active community that Labor Day weekend.
And the week before, so we did 2 weekends.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we did 2 weekends. And of course, people would come by all during the year, knock on the door and say, well, we heard about some artists living here. Can we come in and see what you're doing? And we had a little dog who never barked until Jose put him by the window with his paws up on the sill, and he looked outside and would see a car, and Jose would bark and teach the dog to bark. That was when there would somebody coming up the alley.
I'm curious from all of you, Lynn, the first time you and I talked, you spoke, I think, really beautifully about how Herb and Jose instilled this sort of civic responsibility of an artist in you, and that was really sort of the root of, you know, your time working with the Hyalyn Craft Guild, and, you know, then earlier you talked about, how so many sort of community work and community decisions for this ecosystem of the arts and crafts in the High Country were made on that road. So many meetings, so many conversations that were of import to the community and to its sort of infrastructure and health. And I wonder if, this is a question for everybody, that also makes me think of Artist Alley's relationship to Blowing Rock more widely, to that sort of civic identity. And I'm curious, how you two living on Artist Alley, how you felt a part of the Blowing Rock community. And then also, for Sue and Lee, how did this village understand Artist Alley? I mean, I'm sure some people didn't realize it was right down the road, but I'm sure many people did. I wonder what the impact of that was, kind of from both ends, from inside and outside Artist Alley.
Well, I think a lot of people did know of Artist Alley and knew that they could come to us. And I know Sue came on more than one occasion, not just to buy a pot or whatever, but it was to visit and be inquisitive about how something else was made. And I found that true. I mean, we had, I remember the first Montessori school here. I don't remember, Mountain Pathways, I think it was called. They all came to my studio to learn pottery. And I came to, across the road here, I think it was Good News Nursery, taught the kids how to make leaves in the fall and fired those for them and brought them back. I went to her asking, well, should we just, put iron oxide on these to make them look, like fall or whatever. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I wanted those kids to know. And so then, Mountain Pathways, and they came more than once. And when we had Artist Alley Open House is what we called it. It wasn't always called Artist Alley Open House. That wasn't until the 90s when it was 911 came through. It was just, do we even call it anything? I mean, it was, if you asked where it was on Yanalasi Trail, but it wasn't. But so we just had an open house, is what it was called. But we had buses from Winston-Salem that would come. Were those through Piedmont Craftsman, or were those through the Sawtooth Center? I don't remember.
I think from the Sawtooth, maybe from the Sawtooth Center, but there was a bus that came up from the Mint Museum. And the Women's Auxiliary of the Mint Museum came up.
So we did pull, I feel like, people from the community to be a part of Artist Alley.
Of course, we had lots of friends in Blowing Rock, and Jose loved to cook, and we would have dinners all the time. And so people came to the house. Is somebody with a
Was
question?
there a place in Artist Alley where you had group exhibitions where people could come and see the work as opposed to going into open houses?
No,
No.
we didn't have
So
any
you never
community
had a
building.
group exhibition of whatever the artists that were part of it?
No, what's at the museum is the first show of the community of artists that existed in Blowing Rock. And not all, of course. Barbara is there in Artist Alley. She's a good potter and has become very accomplished in her work, and has built a nice studio and works all the time and full time as a potter now, along with her husband David.
Well, when you're ready, I can add to that a little bit about both of you and how much you met. And when we moved into Artist Alley, we were not potters. We just bought a house in a place called Artist Alley. And we didn't know. And one Labor Day weekend, all these cars came through the alley. Constantly, cars coming through. And we walked up to the top of the alley, and there's a big sign that said, art show.
Yes.
So we said, okay, let's go down to the other end of the alley, and we met the neighbors. Wow.
Yeah.
We had taken a pottery class at Doe Ridge. My husband had gone out and bought all the equipment, but we didn't know what Artist Daily was. So after Labor Day, Herbert said to me, "You'll be in my studio next week. I want to see what you do." So went up to the studio, and Herbert, we met Lynn too. And yes, we borrowed chemicals. They mentored, the friendship, the meals, everything was always there. They were very inclusive, up to the point where eventually Jose and Herbert and Lynn included us in the shows in the last few years, the shows. And I know personally I would not be a potter if it wasn't for my neighbors. Really, I owe so much to them. And we miss them so much. We miss the friendship, the meals. We're all still there. We're a functioning neighborhood. And I think yes, Dave and I are the last ones left, but the neighbors who you talked about, many of them are retiring now and coming back, and I think you'll see the studios back up and running at some point. I hope so. It would be nice. It'd be nice.
One time that we used to all come together was for, all those people got to open house because they were invited, most of them. It was only in the later years that we had the sign. And I think that was Jose's idea. It was white and bright orange paint that he used. But at any rate, everybody was invited, and so it was before computers in these days. And so we hand wrote the invitations. In your studio, and a potter's studio was clean enough to hand address invitations that got mailed out. I think we topped out at like 1,500 invitations. And so it was quite a night. We didn't have dinner that night. We got to work. We did have some drinks. But that's when we would talk about the community. Oh, do you remember so-and-so? La, 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 la. It was a fun night. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, there would be lots of fun nights when Lynn's kiln would be open and we'd see what work came out of there, of her kiln, and my kiln would be open, and we'd see what would be coming out of my kiln. We'd just get together so many times and see each other's work and what we're working on, and talk about going places. And one year we went to, well, it was just Philip and Frank and Jose and I, and the Rosenblatts who purchased Walter Thrift's house, who were friends before. We all went to China together, and that was a marvelous trip. And their daughter, who now owns the house with her husband.
Joan Tallheimer, I think, went on it.
And Joan Tallheimer, who had a summer home a permanent home up on Green Hill Road.
It's now it's now the Delaney's house.
That's right, Joe Delaney has that house now. Yeah.
I had to stay home and make pots.
Talk about a little bit about getting the artists involved in the idea of the museum. In the idea of the BRAHM Museum.
Oh, yes.
At the beginning.
transition, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we, actually, the idea of the original idea of the BRAHM Museum was because this one couple had a collection of Dangerfield works. And they talked with Joe Delaney, who was Dangerfield's grandson, about, you know, giving the collection that they had to some place that would have the facility to exhibit the work and to make proper use of it for the public. And that was the very beginning start of BRAHM. And Joe and these people who owned the Dangerfield collection got together and invited a group of different members of the Blowing Rock community, Sue being one of them, and Jose and I being two of them because we were the artists in the neighborhood. And we had our first meeting at Joe Delaney's house. That was the first meeting of the start of BRAHM.
Like 2021, 2020?
No, 1999.
Yeah, that's right, 1999. And the first exhibit that BRAHM had was in a shop that, it used to be a shop.
It's still, yeah, it's got
Okay, that was a one-man show of Philip Moose's work. And it was a very successful show. I mean, it drew everybody from Blowing Rock to see the show, and all the visitors came. And future years, we had auctions in the the town hall meeting place near the across the street from the firehouse, where we went to different artists living in the surrounding area and asked if they would donate some work to be sold at an auction to raise funds for the for BRAHM or for the start of BRAHM. And but we would never ask artists to actually donate the work completely. They would, the price would always start at a wholesale, what a gallery would normally get for the artist's work, and anything else that was bid after that came to the treasury of BRAHM. And so, and that, we had that for about three summers.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
Let me comment about how you influenced that. He was very modest, but from the very beginning, it made such a huge difference in the idea of this place to have artists and professional artists, you know, working on the project. You know, they had a different insight into what it meant to be a local artist and the quality of the work that was being done locally. So when we were trying to put together calls for art, for auctions and things like that, they knew everybody. I mean, literally, we would go out, and as we got acquainted with artists who were out working in the area, again and again and again, they talked about how they had learned from, you know, Jose and her, and, you know, how often they had been mentors. But they had an amazing network that helped us get acquainted with the artists that were here. But also, as we developed the idea of a museum, like he said, the respect for the artists was such a key element of it right from the get-go, because they insisted, well, no, we need to pay the artists, these are professionals. And we don't want work that's donated, we want their best work. And so that's how the organizations got set up for our original fundraising things. But it made such a key difference to have Herb and Jose in the chairs as the museum itself was coming together. But, yeah.
Well, we're just about at time, and I want to leave just a couple minutes for the audience to ask questions. But I think to wrap up, I'm curious, for all of you, Artist Alley still exists. There's still work being made there. And the show downstairs, the exhibition downstairs is really celebrating its origin point in the decades where it was sort of formed and solidified and that history became clear. And I wonder, as we look forward, as BRAHM as an institution continues to think about how to interpret this really key story for Blowing Rock's own art history. What would you like to see the legacy of Artist Alley look like? What stories do you want to be told? It's not a trick question, I promise.
It's, I'm not being modest, but I don't think it was that exceptional. I think it's something that happens many different places with many different artists, and one real gratifying feeling that I've always had was the fact that the community appreciated and supported what was happening on Artist Alley and the artists, and I think that we were very fortunate to be here in this area of Blowing Rock. Residents and tourists who are here who appreciate the beauty of nature and how it's interpreted by different people, and that you are so fortunate, and I am, and I'm so proud to have been part of the beginning of what is, I consider, a jewel. BRAHM is a real jewel, and which I think really doesn't exist anyplace else that I know of in the country that can compare with what this community has here at BRAHM.
And again, going to the kids, to know that you are right down the street at Blowing Rock Elementary and you can come see a Matisse, or you could be with Philip Moose, or me, or Herb, or whatever. How wonderful of a community they grow up in. And they really do help with a lot of kids in the area, and to me, that's the legacy, and that's what will carry the community forward, is through those children. Thanks for being my mentor.
Oh, there's just one little item I wanted to, a little anecdote about one of the items in the show downstairs. It's that cloak that's on the model figure that Jose designed and wove, the yarn of which we made in the studio on a braiding machine, an old braiding machine that came from a company that made yarn in Shelby, and that Jose was able to get, not even get, they just gave it to him because they were throwing them out and buying new machines. So we refurbished that machine, and that yarn was made on that machine. after Jose made that, it was used a couple of times. Once,
Mexico.
oh yes, I served a couple of years on the board of the American Crafts Council, and we had a world craft meeting in Huaxtepec, Mexico, which is just south of Mexico City. And while we were there, the entire conference was invited to come to the president's mansion in Mexico City. And so there were about half a dozen or more buses that brought people, no, there were about 10 buses that brought people from Huaxtepec to Mexico City for the day to the president's mansion and had dinner, and we met all these different people from different parts of the world who were included and in the conference. And everybody was asked to wear the costume of their country. Well, I came in a seersucker suit. Jose wore this cloak that you see on stage. And there was a photographer who was going around during the reception, taking pictures of all these people in different costumes. And there was one princess from a country just south of Mexico. She was covered in gold jewelry. It was just magnificent. There were Japanese people in beautiful kimonos. And then, of course, there was Jose in this robe. And the photographer came to take a picture of him and asked him, "Oh, what country are you from?" And he said, "Sorry, don't speak English." And on the way back home, he had to go to a meeting at General Motors in Detroit to discuss some fabrics that were being designed for them for some cars which were to appear a couple of years later. And he had this cloak with him, so he took it up with him to Detroit and wore it on the plane to the meetings with the General Motors people in Detroit. So that cloak has been around.